children with special needs are challenged by the changes that a new school year brings. EP's annual Back to School issue presents a helpful selection of resources, guidance, tips, and methods to ease the transition back to school. Read it today at www.epmagazine.com.
Oscar Mike Radio is a proud podcast partner of REITs Across America Radio, heard every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern. They're also big supporters of the nonprofit I Got Your Six, Two Lives at Once. And with every REIT you sponsor through Oscar Mike Radio, $5 goes back to this great organization dedicated to making a difference in the lives of veterans, law enforcement, firefighters, and first responders battling PTSD. Two Lives at Once pairs these brave men and women together with dogs rescued from kill shelters. In this way, two lives are saved at the same time by saving each other. Donate now. Go to REITsAcrossAmerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio to help. That's REITsAcrossAmerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio.
Suicide is preventable, and each of us has a role to play in suicide prevention.
Suicide is complex. There is no single cause.
And it's not always a mental health issue. It could be loss of a job or home, financial or relationship issues, pain, or leaving the military.
Suicide does not discriminate. It affects all ages, races, and genders, veterans or not.
If you know a veteran who is struggling, connect with them. Let them know help is available.
There is quick and easy access to services in times of crisis.
Dial 988, then press 1. Talking about it is okay.
Don't keep it inside. Don't be ashamed. Don't wait. Reach out.
Find resources at va.gov/reach.
Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio. My name is Travis, Marine Corps veteran and your host. Oscar Mike Radio is part of the Hubuzoo Network. You can find out more on hubuzoo.com. I want to thank my sponsors, Joyce Asek of Asek Real Estate, Army National Guard veteran Mark Holmes of Reapers Detailing and Power Washing, and my supporters, Exceptional Parent Magazine and Kason Shaving Company. Thank you very much. We're into September. It's just after Labor Day weekend. The fall is going to kick into high gear here in a minute, and I have a special guest with you for us today. Author, filmmaker, writer, lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Air National Guard. He joins us to talk about his book, This Troubled Ground. Les Carroll, sir, welcome to Oscar Mike Radio.
Thank you, Travis. It's an honor to be here with you.
I'm really pumped about this. You wrote this book from a very different perspective. It's a very interesting story about a side of the military we don't hear a lot about, really. And then you just have a career in, writing, filmmaking, and, other pursuits that you've done in photography. And so I'm really interested to learn more about that. Before we get to all the good stuff, and it's all good, kind of tell us, a little bit about Les and how he got in the military, and we'll take it from there.
Well, I joined in 1985, and so that was before Desert Storm, and it's kind of peacetime. I never had the idea that my career would go the way it did and that the world would go the way it did. In 1985, we were still talking about making sure that the Soviets didn't, come into Germany and things like that, and or into West Germany. Um, and so, we were all about deterrence. Air power is deterrence and that kind of thing. And then I stayed 4 years in the Air Force, and then I went to their National Guard. While I was in the Air Force, I had some pretty cool experiences. One of them was the Bob Hope show came to Pope Air Force Base, and I got to run the little media area. So I got to meet Bob Hope and Lucille Ball and
Oh,
Don
wow.
Johnson and Brooke Shields and Brooke Shields when she was still in college. And it was a great experience. It was one of those things you just kind of fall into as a public affairs officer. And my boss let me handle all the media stuff at the hangar where the celebrities were. So that was a lot of fun. But then after that, I went to Germany, and then I came back and finished at Charleston Air Force Base, and then joined the Air National Guard in 1989. And the first big thing that happened when I joined the Guard, or after I joined the Guard, 3 weeks after my swearing in, Hurricane Hugo hit the coast of South Carolina. And at the time when we activated the South Carolina National Guard, I believe it was the largest peacetime activation ever. There have been a lot of bigger ones since that time, but I think that was the biggest at the time. We activated around 7,000 guardsmen at different times during that event. And I thought that's kind of how my career was going to be. I thought as a National Guard officer that my career was going to be mostly, civil defense, being called out for natural disasters and that kind of thing. I didn't give much thought to, even though I was in an F-16 unit, we were just training and being prepared in case, we didn't, we weren't thinking about Saddam Hussein and
Right, right.
Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan and all that. But then 1 year after I joined the Guard was when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and basically everybody in the military, our lives changed. My unit was very active as an F-16 unit, and our whole focus and our whole direction changed, and for the rest of my career, it was focused on the Middle East.
You go through this, and people don't talk about the Air Force enough. You're the butt of jokes sometimes, but there's a very real threat that the Air Force has created to mitigate. And with the Air National Guard, a lot of people do not appreciate, in my view, the difference between the Air Force and the Air National Guard. Can you kind of educate us a little bit about the differences between the two? Because it's a very distinct mission role what the Air National Guard does, sir.
Well, the recruiting answer and everything is that the Guard has a dual mission, a state mission and a federal mission. The state mission being to respond to something like a hurricane or tornado, big natural disaster. We do it all the time. I mean, in this country, we're having a lot of hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, um, even some earthquakes and things like that. So the National Guard is always out there serving and doing that, what we call the state mission, where the governor puts us into action. And then the federal mission, of course, is to be part of the Air Force, part of the Army. And, back when I first joined, we were kind of this sort of augmentation force, or this, the second string or something like that. But in Desert Storm, my unit performed admirably. I mean, we were one of the top units in Desert Storm. We were one of the first ones to fly into Iraq and into Kuwait and drop bombs and do that. So my particular unit and a lot of Air National Guard units have developed into and are recognized as top line units. Um, we have a very experienced unit, the 169th Fighter Wing. We usually can recruit the best active duty pilots that want to get out, join the state, keep flying, and maybe become airline pilots or business people. And we can usually get the best ones. We're right by Shaw Air Force Base, and when those guys want to get out, they come to McIntyre to our base and apply to get in our unit. So our unit is just full of very, very experienced top line pilots and maintainers.
Did you fly?
No, I was a public affairs officer.
Oh,
I flew in an F-16 a few times, and I flew a lot. My first back when I first joined the Air Force, I was in a C-130 unit. Flew a lot with that unit. Got to fly a few times with the in the F-16, just as a backseater, and and then I had some harrowing experiences flying in Afghanistan, which I can talk about later. When if you want to ask me the scariest I ever was in Afghanistan, it wasn't facing the enemy; it was flying in a Chinook across Western Afghanistan, 50 feet off the ground.
Well, Army aviation is different than the Air Force. Those rotary wing guys are a little out there, from what I understand.
That wasn't with the Americans; that was with Italians. I think they're even more bigger risk takers. I think we were just crossing. We were going across Western Afghanistan. There was a ground threat possible, so we flew very close to the ground. We had some special forces guys on the ground. I mean, on the airplane. I don't even know what they were. They were, they could have been Navy SEALs, could have been CIA. I don't know. We had two of those guys on the aircraft. We just stopped or landed in the middle of nowhere, and they jumped off and disappeared, and then we just took off again. But yeah, that's a story, and I talk about that in the book. About I say when I do my presentations that I'm not the American sniper, I'm not the lone survivor, I'm not the great late Pat Tillman. I didn't go out there and engage the enemy face to face. I was a public affairs officer. But from my book, I got, from that experience, I got a unique story, different than those stories of those great heroic warriors.
Let's talk about the book and the purpose behind the book, because when this show airs, it will have been about a year since the book came out. And reading about the book and going through it, this troubled ground tells a different part of the military experience than you normally do hear from the big name military veterans or active duty people who have distinguished themselves. This is a very different side of that. So kind of take me into where the idea of the book came from, and what happened when you put the book out, please.
I did two Afghanistan deployments and the 4-month assignment at Dover Air Force Base at the mortuary. And I always had this question in my mind. If you remember the scene from Saving Private Ryan, where the captain says, "How will I ever tell my wife about days like today?" That sort of rang in my head a lot. I was always thinking about that. How will I tell my family about and friends about being on the ramp at Dover when the remains of fallen service members come back, or being on a Chinook flying across Western Afghanistan, or in a news conference with Dan Rather and people like that had come to Afghanistan to cover the conflict there. And so that question was always in my mind, and I always took a lot of notes. I took a lot of notes. I'm a big journal keeper. If I'd have an interesting experience, I would just write it down almost like a little short story. And then eventually all that started to come together. I mean, I struggled for a lot of years trying to figure out how that becomes a book, whether it's a memoir, novel. And I had this fictional story that I wanted to tell as well. So I just kind of, I called my book part memoir, part novel. The publisher said, let's just call it an autobiographical novel. So that's what we call it.
You start writing the book. Have you ever written before at that scale? Because I'm finding out the hard way that I have the idea, but man, getting it on paper can be challenging, because there's the aspect of getting the feeling of what you're trying to convey out there. And you're on the ramp, you're watching this happen, and you're trying to get that feeling into what you've written. What was that like, Les?
Before or as soon as I got there at Dover, we had to sign a non-disclosure agreement that basically said we wouldn't release the names or not, not they were released, but we wouldn't use the names when we weren't supposed to, or a lot of details. And I don't remember exactly what was in it. When I got ready to publish the book, I asked them to send me one. They said, we can't find it. So I said, okay, well, I kind of remember it. I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to tell this story in as much detail as I think I can possibly tell it without violating that non-disclosure agreement. I didn't use this person's name in the book, but there is one fallen Marine I was there for his homecoming or his return. And I've since gotten to know his family. I've interviewed him for 2 documentaries, and they've told me anytime I want to, I can say his name. And so this is Sergeant Jeremy McQuarrie. He was from Columbus, Indiana. And in the book, I described in detail the day he came home from Afghanistan. And that was sort of the one day I took sort of as the most intense and memorable day, and just described it. I described other times being on the ramp as well, but that day I described, and and so I didn't use the name Jeremy McQuarrie at the time because I didn't know I was gonna eventually interview his family and get and become close with them and stay in touch with them. But his family knows when they read that, they know exactly what I'm describing. Um, but I'm gonna hold the book up, not so much as a pitch, but just so people can see this picture, which I don't know if you can see it. That's blurry.
Yeah,
I've got I got my foreground blurred too. I guess I'll try that. I'll try something with that later. Um, but anyway, it's just a picture of a dignified transfer of the carry team bringing off the transfer case. And I did that 100 times. We always try not to let it get routine. I mean, sometimes it does, unfortunately, where we just go, okay, here we go again. Do it just like we did it yesterday. Make sure everything's perfect. Make sure we're all doing our job and being in the right places and everything. I mean, you have to do that as well, but the important thing is you can't forget that when you step on that ramp and you see that case coming off, that in that case is a fallen U.S. service member who has given his or her life fighting for our country, and that their families are standing right beside you.
right beside you.
Yeah, well, 20 feet, 30 feet away.
But still, I mean, you're watching them experience this moment of pain and loss that will probably never be the same way ever again, because
Yeah,
I have to think that once they see this, they know that there's no coming back from this, that this is
oh, yeah.
permanent. And you're not going through it yourself, but you have to relive it all the time with them. How do you keep your team and your leadership, focused on the mission of providing the best experience you can, but you got to share in that pain too every time?
Well, here's the one thing: that job is not for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of great people in the military, but not everybody is cut out and could do that job. You got to be really compassionate, patient, focused. I mean, you can't get out there and start daydreaming and forget what you're doing, or you can't, go, well, here we go again, another dignified transfer. I got to get up and be on the ramp at 2 o'clock in the morning. You can't complain and let those kinds of thoughts. Well, if they come into your head, you got to get rid of them and make sure your actions don't reflect any of that. Um, this day I was talking about earlier, when Sergeant McQuarrie and 3 other Marines returned, um, I had a brand new team. It was toward the end of my time there, and I had volunteered to stay an extra month, and so all the NCOs and my deputy had all transitioned out, and I had a new team. And that was one of the toughest days, and it was my 95th or something, but it was their first or second. And so when we got done with that, and we were done with the dignified transfer, the media and everybody, the families were all off the ramp. I turned around, and my deputy, who was a a big, muscular African American captain who looked like an NFL linebacker. He had tears streaming down his face, which didn't surprise me. I mean, I cried out there a lot, but and then he started apologizing to me, for crying and letting his emotions come out. And I said, man, don't apologize. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. He said, well, I didn't keep my bearing. And I said, yes, you did. You stood right there for 30 minutes, while families were, 30, 40 feet away from you, wailing in agony. And you stood there and did your job. And, if tears streamed down your face, that's fine. You did your job, you held your ground, you stayed, you kept your composure. And I've said, if you need to cry, you can cry. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. So, it's just a good example of, looking at somebody you'd never think you'd see. It's like when you're watching some NFL star giving a post game interview and he gets emotional or something. And that's kind of how it was. Not somebody you would think would cry, but it was emotional. And that was about the most emotional of all the days, even for me. But again, I had done it, 95 times, and it was their first for some of them. And it's just I describe it in detail in the book, with the others coming off the plane too, and some of the reactions we heard. You said something about facing the family. We didn't face them very much. I usually had my back to them. They were usually off my right shoulder, because I was standing between the families and the media, and we were all facing the aircraft. So I heard the families more than I saw them, but I would see them get on and off the bus. And every once in a while, when somebody would get on the bus and I was down below the bus, they'd look out the window, and we were 10 feet away from each other making eye contact. And that was meaningful, and sad and heartbreaking as well, especially when you look up there and there's a 19 or 20-year-old widow just saw her husband's remains come off an airplane. 2 years ago, they were going to the senior prom in high school.
Yeah. The, it's been about a year since the book came out. What was the reaction to the book as you started getting in people's hands? And, what did it bring up anything else in your mind as you started going through, the book? I wouldn't say tour is the right word, but, getting the book out there, how'd you feel that the book was received?
Well, I had three retired general officers who read the book and gave me reviews. And I told them when they were willing to read it, I said, don't beat around the bush. Say how you feel about the book. And they did, and they were honest, and they were very complimentary. But one of them said, that it reminded him of his own deployments and his own time in combat. And I think one of them said it was difficult to read sometimes because of the thoughts that it brought back. And quite a few people who served in Afghanistan and have read it have told me that. I just recently saw at the time he was a young NCO. He's a little older now, but hadn't seen him in 15 years. And we served together over there in Afghanistan on my first deployment. And he said at first he was having a hard time reading it. And then he eventually read it and very much appreciated it. And I went and saw him and hadn't seen him in 15 years. And it was just like it was yesterday when we were there in Afghanistan together. So the reaction's good. People who know nothing about the Dover mission, non-military people, keep switching back and forth from Dover to Afghanistan, Afghanistan to Dover. But people that don't know anything about that mission have just come up to me and said, "Wow, thanks for telling the story. We had no idea, one, what it takes to take care of the fallen and their families, and two, how uh, much effort we put into it, the American people and the military put into it." And I think people are very much appreciative of that part of it, learning how we take care of the fallen and their families.
You also did filmmaking and I think some more writing. But let's talk about the filmmaking for a second. Was that just an extension of doing the book, or were you, doing film before the book?
I've always been doing documentary films. Some of them are just little small projects, that we did in our unit. Like back in '89, and after Hugo and that big deployment, the adjutant general said to us, "Hey, I want you to put together a little documentary." And so I started gathering all the material and writing a script, and I got a Army Guard captain or lieutenant captain that was he's actually an attorney, but he was a part-time, M-Day soldier, and he edited it. I didn't even know he had that skill, but he was like this really good editor. So we put together this 20-minute documentary, and so that was my, kind of my first experience doing that. Um, and then I wrote some books back in the mid '90s, and then in about 2005 or six, our wing commander in the Air Guard unit came to us and said, "We want you to do our 60th anniversary was coming up," and he said, I want you to do a documentary, and I want it to be like Band of Brothers." And I went, okay, well, Band of Brothers, made by two of the greatest filmmakers the world has ever known, $10 million budget, some of the
10
greatest
million?
writers. I don't
I
know. So,
I should join the Air Force, sir. I mean, I didn't know you had the budget like that. That's
no,
a
no, I'm talking about Band of Brothers, 10 million an
oh,
episode.
oh.
Um, 10 million an episode, and Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, and a lot of great writers that if I just threw the names out, most people don't know them, but Graham Yost, and Graham Yost wrote the screenplay to the movie Speed years ago. I mean, these great writers that were on that. I'm thinking like, okay, well, we'll do our best, sir. To we ended up doing a really good documentary on the history of our Air Guard unit, and that was in 2006. And then when I got out, when I retired, we did Bringing the Fallen Home, which was based on Dover. That aired nationally on public television. And then I've done 3 or 4 more since then that have been more statewide projects.
What aspect do you enjoy the most about filmmaking?
Um, Honestly, seeing the final result,
Yeah.
because it can be tough. It's tedious especially when you first started and you sit down and this interview we do it, we do hundreds of hours of it. And then it can be tedious. And so it's just like anything. That's like building a house or, building anything. It's tough when you're doing it and then you love seeing the final product. And
Sure.
that's how I am with documentary films or writing books. It's sometimes you wonder if the final product is going to be worth it, but it always seems to be.
Well, it's just amazing too, because when you got started, technology was very different back in 2006. Software was very different, and now there's so many tools you got to keep abreast of. But it's still about the story, isn't it? Though.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's always about the story. And when documentaries, I mean, it's about the people, it's about the interviews and their stories. Of course, it helps to get a lot of good video and photos and everything too. But documentary films are all about the characters and the events.
So I'm on with Lieutenant Colonel Les Carroll, U.S. Air Force, U.S. National Guard, and we're talking about his book, This Troubled Ground, and it's a very, very different military story. And sir, I'm just honored that you had me check it out and learn more about it, because I'm thinking about it. You went to Afghanistan, you saw what happened over there, then you came back to this unit, the mortuary unit, and we're really, I mean, I'm thinking about it in some cases, depending upon the situation, some of these families, you might be the last active duty or in uniform person they see for a while, ever maybe. And so there is a standard you all have to keep. There is a bearing you have to keep throughout this process. Um, one thing, if we can just diverge a little bit, is a lot of people, civilians mainly, ask me, well, was the Afghanistan war worth it? And I'm not trying to get political or anything, but I do wonder sometimes, was the cost worth it, or was it just not done right? Because it seems like, I'm reading about the Taliban trying to get trade open back up and things like that. And I don't know. I just don't know.
Well, a lot of what the book is about.
Yeah.
A lot of it was about my own struggle with, am I making a difference? Am I doing anything worthwhile? Is the world going to be any better? Is Afghanistan going to be any better? Because of the year I spent here. Um, and then a lot of the families, they want hope. I mean, that was, if they lost a loved one, that's all they've got left is the hope that their loved one died for something. And I think families, most of them that I talk to feel that way. After the withdrawal in 2021, I think a lot of people lost that hope. I certainly lost a lot of the hope I had, that because I had a lot of engagement with young, uh, educated Afghans, had a lot of engagement with women working in the media there. And so we were, one of my takeaways was, that, you come home here and you see all these, great professional, successful women journalists, and you think, now maybe they got a chance. The women of Afghanistan have that chance to achieve those kinds of careers. And I saw that a lot because I was out working with the Afghan media. I went to a lot of Afghan TV stations, radio stations, um, and saw Afghan women pursuing careers in journalism, and that was very much, that was very inspirational to me. When we drive down the street, we'd see young Afghan girls going to school. Um, we'd see Afghan women on going to university, and so that was very inspirational. So we probably have lost a lot of that after 21, after the withdrawal of 2021. And actually, I was about ready to publish the book right before that withdrawal, and then that happened, and then I went, I don't know if I have a book anymore because my message is kind of diluted. My message of hope, I don't know if it's there anymore. So I wrote an epilogue. I talked to a lot of Gold Star families. I talked to people who lost, I guess they would still be considered Gold Star families, but there was a young woman from the embassy, a young diplomat that was killed, and I had corresponded with her father. And I wanted to know how he felt about it. And he wasn't happy with the withdrawal, but he didn't feel any different about his daughter's service. She was killed working on opening a school for Afghan boys and girls, and that's how she was killed. And so, he said, I don't, I'm not going to let the way it ended tarnish my memories of my daughter and the fact that she was doing what she loved to do. Her life's mission was to help people and try to make their lives better.
Yeah.
And so I'd actually was using her as a character, and I actually got in touch with him and asked him, or told him I was doing that, asked him if it was all right, and he said, "Why don't you just use her real name?" Because I put a fictional name, and he said, "Why don't you use her real name?" And I said, "If that's okay, I will." And he goes, "Yes, just use her real name." And then it, and then at the end, so in the end, when I was talking about different characters and people, I said, this is a real person. Um, and Anne Smedinghoff is what's her name. And he said, he just said, use her real name, please. Let people know who she was and what kind of person she was and how she died and that she died doing what she believed in. And so I used her real name in the book. One of the few where I actually used her real name.
What's next for this book? It's been about a year, almost a year, when this show airs. You've run through a gamut of emotions that you experienced personally, and you've seen the pain and suffering of others as they lost their loved ones. Are you going to follow up with anything else, in the written word, or are you looking at another film project?
Well, I have actually just finished the first draft of my next novel. Um, and talking to the publisher about that. That'll be a year from now before it's published, comes out. so I'm going to keep, I'm going to keep marketing this book, and I mean, I would love to see this book made into a movie, or, if I had that kind of connection. If you do, let me know. Be sure to pass it on to your filmmaker friends in Hollywood. But um, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I still sometimes I think, had the book's been out a year, we hadn't sold as many copies as I thought we would, et cetera, et cetera. But being out for a year isn't that long, and so I'm actually sort of relaunching my efforts with this book with the 1 year anniversary of the book coming out. So I'm going to keep, I'm going to keep going out there. I'm going to keep going to libraries, and I'm going to keep working on it. And I'm going to, I hope that this book, maybe could become a movie one day.
Well, speaking of the book, and the book is called This Troubled Ground, and ladies and gentlemen, I'll have the links to Lieutenant Colonel Carroll's website and Oscar Mike Radio website post and other places. How can people purchase the book, contact you, or just see what you're up to, stay in touch?
Well, I mean, as in most websites, there's a contact page at the end, and people can get in touch with me, and I answer those because I don't get a ton of comments, so I always answer them. They come directly to my email, and then I just email people directly back. So they can contact me through my website, which is lescarroll.com, which is just my name, lescarroll.com. The book's available at Amazon, and all the booksellers and retailers. It's in about 300 or 400 public libraries across the country. I've been really working hard to try to get it into libraries. I've spoken at a lot of libraries, and I want people to be able to get the book and read it without always having to buy it. I want people to buy it, but I don't want to go talk at a public library and tell people they got to buy the book to get it. I want the library to have it. So, I've been trying to get it out to public libraries a lot too.
The term is called dignified transfer, and one, I think it's important for Americans to understand that there truly is a cost to the liberties and freedoms that we enjoy and continue to enjoy. And I think more light needs to be shed on that. But also, you decide to tell the story, and you talk about in your book when it hit you that this story needed to be told. A lot of veterans tell me, hey, no one's really interested in my story. No one will be, interested in hearing what I have to say. But you took your experience and made it relatable to people on an emotional level. Do you feel that veterans could do more to let people know what they do and how they did it, sir?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of veterans have written and write books, and that's good. I mean, um, there's some really good books out there,
Yeah.
really good movies out there. And I mean, almost always based on true stories. But yeah, I think veterans need to continue to tell their stories. I'm gonna still do a World War II story, I think. Um, my brother-in-law's father had an amazing story, and he told me a little bit about it. And one day I'm gonna try to see if I can dig up all my notes and do that story. Because of course, World War II veterans are leaving us every day, and eventually we're not going to have any more. So I'm gonna keep telling. I'm gonna try to tell that story as well. But yeah, I just think people just need to keep telling stories, and they're always more interesting than fiction. Um,
Always.
the real life stories are way more interesting than a story that you try to make up most of the time.
All right. Last question. Well, I got 1.5 questions, sir. I ask every Air Force, Air National Guard personnel. I have to know, did you ever go through Barksdale Air Force Base during your time in the service?
I didn't.
Okay.
I've
No,
never been. I know
no,
where it is. I don't think I've ever been there.
I joined the Marine Corps from Shreveport Bossier, and I got to tour the air base. They had the open house where they bring everybody in, and
Yeah.
I didn't appreciate how good that place was until I got to some Marine Corps places. That's all I'm going to say. The Air Force
Okay.
does it right. Second thing is, sir, should we retire the A-10? Yeah, I've heard different. Oh, I
That's
get
funny that you should ask, because one of my former, I think he's my commander, but he was our vice wing commander. His son is an A-10 pilot. He was a great F-16 fighter pilot, and his son is an A-10 pilot right now. So I don't know, but it's interesting that I don't know. I mean, the A-10, I guess, still has its purposes. To be
yeah.
honest with you, if I didn't know that a few people were flying it, and I wouldn't even know that we still had it because it's so old.
It is old, and I mean, it's older than both of us, but it's a well, the B-52 is older than both of us by a
Yeah,
lot.
B-52 is old. I mean, our F-16s are old.
Right, right.
I mean, when we got this model of F-16s in our unit back in around late '90s, I think, or maybe right at the beginning of maybe right after desert or right after I can't remember if it's before or after 9/11, but they're 93, 94, 95 models. And those were new, and they're still kind of new for F-16s.
Wow.
But I don't know, the A-10, I don't know.
All right, fair enough. I mean, no right
If
or
I'm
wrong.
ever on the ground and I see one flying over to protect me, I'll be glad we have them. But I'm a little
Absolutely.
old now, so I shouldn't happen. But I don't know.
Hopefully, hopefully. Well, Lieutenant Colonel Carroll, it has just been a pleasure and honor to hear this perspective from you about the dignified transfer, what that means. And, I'm going to have the links to this troubled ground in the website post. I encourage you to check it out. If you go to your local library and ask for it, maybe they'll get it for you. But it's a good read. It really brings a whole human side to the military experience that kind of doesn't get told a whole lot. And sir, I just want to thank you for your time and I appreciate you coming on and talk with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you saying about the local library, because that is the best way to get it in, is for a patron with a library card to
Absolutely.
go there and ask for it.
So let's help Lieutenant Colonel Carroll celebrate his 1 year anniversary of publishing this book. Let's continue to support veteran authors, filmmakers, and other creators because we have amazing stories to tell. And sir, as we say in Oscar Mike Radio, we're mission in flight. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Travis.
Remember, on it teaches our mission. We care about it and we do it every day. But I think there are things that just hit you and give you a reason to go on. The theme for our 2024 for Reads Across America is Live with Purpose. It just seemed to fit in with the vows of the REAP, the 10 attributes that we feel represent our United States military. I thought, what a great opportunity to put those two things together and show our kids through how we act some of the things that can make their lives better, their communities better, and by doing that, the country better. For me, Live with Purpose, I think, it's mindset. Set some guidelines and then go out and purposefully make life different, make a change. It's an opportunity to set an example.
Thank you for listening and watching Oscar Mike Radio, where our active duty service members and veterans are in action and the mission is in flight. Oscar Mike Radio is an oversized load Co-Sinister One production. If you are a veteran or know a veteran who needs help, please dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line.